Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. We've got another severe weather threat on tap for today, this time back down into the southern plains. We've been kind of focusing on the northern plains for the last couple of weeks. Now we've got a slight risk down toward the eastern part of New Mexico into far west Texas and down into the Texas Hill Country in parts of central and southern Texas. So slight risk, level 2 out of 5. There is an associated tornado threat, although I think that's going to be on the minimal side today. The main threats are going to be damaging wind and large hail. So let's go ahead and get started here. First, we'll show you who's in and who's out. This slight risk goes all the way up basically from Amarillo down toward the I-27 corridor through Lubbock, Midland, Odessa, down toward the I-10 corridor, Fort Stockton, Iraan, Sonora, Junction, as far east as the Austin, San Antonio area, including places like Del Rio, Eagle Pass, Uvalde. So anyone in those areas has the highest threat for severe weather today. So let's go ahead and get started here. Take a look at what the setup beholds for today. You can see here on our water vapor satellite imagery, we've got a pretty decent looking trough here across the western half of the continental United States. You can see this kind of dip in the flow here across the western half of the country. Several little small perturbations within this. You can maybe make one out here across kind of western Mexico, starting to fire some storms already this morning out here across far west Texas. And then maybe one up here. It's kind of hard to make out on this satellite image, but you can see some storms firing here in Oklahoma right now. This is about 8:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time. So we've got some storms already firing thanks to these kind of small-scale perturbations within the large-scale flow. You can see kind of this broad sort of anticyclonic flow here. That's because we have a high-pressure centered just off the east coast here. There was a little tropical disturbance that moved its way onshore here last night. There's a little bit of a swirl in the flow. You'll see that as we take a look at the upper air maps this morning. Closer look here at the storms that are firing this morning. So this is the northern set of storms that's firing here into Oklahoma. Large batch of storms. We've been hearing some thunder outside here in Norman this morning. So if you hear some thunder in the background, that's exactly what's going on. These storms are firing here, even down into northwest Texas. These will remain sub-severe. So places like Vernon, Wichita Falls, areas kind of like that may see some rumbles of thunder this morning. However, those should remain sub-severe. If we take a look at our sector down here, far west Texas, we've got some rain and thunderstorms firing here across far west Texas, the Big Bend area, I-10 corridor down to the south. Again, these should remain sub-severe throughout the day, throughout the morning. Maybe just some rumbles of thunder, some heavy rain at times, maybe some small hail, but nothing on the severe side this morning. However, that should change this afternoon. Let's take a look at some data here. This is the upper air map. This is at 500 millibars, so about 18,000 feet in the atmosphere. And you can see the long wave sort of trough here centered across the kind of Utah, Colorado, Wyoming region. The axis kind of extending down toward the Four Corners region. And we've got these just little perturbations in the flow. We've got this little one that's kind of a little bit deeper down here across western Mexico into west Texas. It's probably what's setting off these storms down here in the Big Bend region. Then we've got other little perturbations in the flow. They may be a little bit easier to pick out here at 700 millibars, just a little bit lower in the atmosphere. And you can see here, closed kind of contour here at 700 millibars. We've got little perturbations rounding the base of this trough. You can see the little kinks in the flow here, one across kind of the northeast New Mexico, western Texas Panhandle region. There's one out in here. There's a little bit of rain up in Kansas that may be a result of this little perturbation there. And then we've got this one that's kind of hanging back there that we saw across western Mexico here that's going to be a player in today's severe weather event across Texas. Let's go down a little bit to 850 millibars. Actually, let's talk about this. Usually when we see a trough out here centered over the west, we would expect some sort of lee cyclogenesis, so a surface cyclone to develop on the east side of the Rockies. Basically when you have, sort of west to east flow or southwesterly flow traversing the Rocky Mountains here, you get sinking air on the east side of the Rockies. In turn, You can do a bunch of equation stuff here, but that often results in a surface circulation that develops on the east side of the Rockies, somewhere in southeast Colorado down toward eastern New Mexico. And that, I believe, should be the case today. We have nice westerly flow here across the Rockies, so we should get some sort of surface low development, perhaps somewhere down here in eastern New Mexico. And we'll take a look at the progs here in a little bit to see if that is the case, but I would expect that to be the case. Right now, though, not really showing much of a low-level circulation. We do have a little bit of a low-level jet extending from kind of northern South Dakota down to the south across far eastern Colorado into the Texas Panhandle. Fairly weak, 25 to 30 knots would be adequate for a severe threat, but fairly weak at this point. You can see the kind of tropical disturbance down here with almost 50-plus knot winds here, 850 millibars, so a pretty decent tropical disturbance for the middle of May here. That's going to move off to the north, not going to be a player in today's severe weather event. Just wanted to point that out there on the 850 millibar map. Let's go down to our surface map now. You can see things are kind of chaotic here. We've got a very well-defined high-pressure area centered across the Great Lakes region. You can see the clockwise flow around this high that's centered basically over kind of that northern Michigan area. So big high pressure there. Here's our tropical disturbance down here across Alabama. That's going to move off to toward the northeast today. Perhaps a marginal tornado threat out ahead of that today. And you can see here not much in the way of surface features here across West Texas, across the target area. We do have a little bit of a surface low here across kind of the Fort Stockton area with maybe a warm front extending out to the east. Out ahead of that surface low. That should mean that the moisture is kind of confined here down to the south. And we'll take a look at our surface map now. Refresh here, make sure we have the most up-to-date data. And yeah, you can see a little bit of evidence of that surface circulation there, kind of in the Fort Stockton, Pecos area. And you can see that the dew points definitely, the higher dew points definitely confined to central and southern Texas. You can see down here toward the Brownsville area, 72-degree dew points down here. The higher dew points confined to far south Texas, low to mid 60s up here with northern extent. These should continue to move off toward the north today and should move kind of into New Mexico. Given these trajectories, you can see that trajectories are very much still out of the east, and it's not super favorable for widespread moisture return on a severe weather event. Usually we like to see the trajectories already out of the southeast or south. That will really help bring those higher dew points up into the target area. Not really going to be the case today. We've got that kind of cold front that has settled thanks to that surface high pressure area, this colder air that's kind of settled down in even as far south as kind of Kansas and Oklahoma. So that's kind of pushed down here, a little bit colder air. And so those trajectories are still kind of, if you draw the flow around this kind of high pressure ridge, these trajectories down here in Texas are going to be out of the east. And so we're going to have to wait until those really start to flip around. Maybe in the vicinity of this weak surface low, they may start to flip around a little bit more to the southeast and help draw those higher dew points up to the north, perhaps more into eastern New Mexico, up against the mountains there, the higher terrain. So would expect storms maybe to initially start firing in the higher moisture out in eastern New Mexico, far west Texas today, initially, and then move their way into the Texas Panhandle, Texas South Plains, into far west Texas. So moisture may be a little bit of a concern today. Let's take a look at some soundings. This is at Norman this morning. You can see that really stout layer of kind of cooler air, 56 degrees here at the surface. Deep moisture for sure at the surface, maybe on the cold side of a frontal zone here. But there is some elevated instability this morning. That's why these thunderstorms are ongoing across Oklahoma at this point. There is quite a bit of elevated instability ahead of that little perturbation in the flow, which is helping initiate all this rain and thunder here across Oklahoma. But let's go farther south now. We'll go down south. Let's go to Corpus Christi first, kind of our source region for where these trajectories are pulling the profiles from, if you will. Kind of a sort of 70-degree dew point here at the surface, 73 over 70 here this morning. But fairly shallow moist layer here. You can see that drier air, the separation between the green line, the dew point, and the red line, becomes much greater very quickly right off the surface. So very shallow moisture here at Corpus Christi, which may be a hindrance here to a much more significant tornado threat, an overall severe threat today, because this moisture is getting pulled toward the west and northwest from those trajectories. So as a result, this may be a little bit of an issue today. We do have quite a bit of elevated instability. Lapse rates, though, in the lowest kind of couple kilometers of the atmosphere. This is 3 kilometers here at about 700 millibars. Not the most robust here. A little bit of warm air here just off the surface here. Some weaker lapse rates aloft. Would expect some destabilization today. It is probably quite a bit. There's probably quite a bit of cloud cover out here across the western Texas region. And that should kind of stay the same for a little bit, at least this morning. We do see some clearing across eastern New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle. That perturbation may continue this rain and storms here into West Texas, into the Texas South Plains here this morning. So clearing may be a little bit slow this morning, but I do expect some clearing by this afternoon. That should help destabilize the lower portion of the atmosphere here this afternoon. Let's go out to Del Rio. This is a little bit different picture here at Del Rio. Fairly deep moist layer, all the way up to almost 700 millibars here. So very deep moisture at this point. Much steeper lapse rates aloft here, which means that elevated mixed layer, that kind of layer of warm air aloft that emanates from the desert southwest, western Mexico, is somewhat in place today. So large hail should be a threat for any discrete updrafts that go up initially across eastern New Mexico, far west Texas. Large hail, damaging winds should be a concern as well. The tornado threat is going to be overall, I think, fairly minimal. We do have a little bit of curvature in the photographs this morning. That does mean that there's a little bit of warm advection ongoing. And we should get some surface low development, so I do expect the low-level winds to strengthen somewhat today. Although that low-level jet may remain at bay throughout much of the day until that surface low really starts to take shape. After dark, we may get that classic nocturnal enhancement of the low-level jet. But I wouldn't expect too much enhancement of the low-level wind shear today for a significant tornado threat, perhaps mainly focused near terrain features, perhaps down near Fort Stockton. That always seems to be a hot spot for tornadic activity and kind of these more marginal setups due to the enhancement of the terrain out there. Perhaps on the Caprock as well, although by that time storms may be congealed into a line given their kind of outflow dominant character, weak in this kind of weak shear, more multi-cell nature. But Caprock has been known to assist in tornado development on these more marginal kind of days. So we'll have to wait and see about that. So let's take a look at some model data here, kind of round things out here. So this is going to be the 6Z NAM. I do not believe the 12Z NAM is in yet. It's just coming in. So we'll take a look here. It's out far enough here so we can take a look at the very fresh set of data here coming in from the 12Z NAM. So you can see here the kind of overall long wave trough. This is at 500 millibars once again. Overall long wave trough here across the western half of the continental United States, moving off to the west. Kind of zonal flow, west to east flow here across the western portion of the country. A little bit of a stronger belt of flow here across Colorado. Kind of weaker with southern extent, so that may hinder the deep layer shear a little bit here, make it more marginal for supercells with southern extent. But as we go through the day today, you can see these little sort of perturbations rotating around the base of this trough. These little sort of perturbations here in the flow, kind of hard to pick out, but that should be enough, especially with northern extent where the shear is a little bit stronger, to maybe initiate some supercells here across northeast and eastern New Mexico late, kind of maybe by about midday, just after lunch, maybe 1 to 2 p.m. here across the higher terrain. Storms do like to fire a little bit earlier across that higher terrain. Then with southern extent, it's kind of this first perturbation may be a little bit mistimed. We may see a storm threat evolve across kind of south central Texas here, southwest central Texas there, if you will, kind of the Laredo, Uvalde, Fredericksburg areas, perhaps ahead of this perturbation here by just after lunch. Then things should start to fill in across eastern New Mexico by late this afternoon. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time here. So a little bit of a kink in the flow here. Should be additional storm development here by 3 to 4 p.m. out here across West Texas into eastern New Mexico. Those will move off. Again, the deep layer shear may be a little bit more marginal for supercells, maybe more of a multi-cell storm mode. So storms should have the tendency maybe to congeal into clusters or line segments here for the most part, given the overall kind of weaker deep layer shear here across this region. With northern extent, a little bit stronger flow, maybe a little bit better of a chance for supercells up here into northeast New Mexico. Places like Hereford, Dimmitt, up here in the kind of western Texas panhandle. Maybe a slightly higher chance for supercells, although the marginal risk, the slight risk kind of cuts off at the I-40 corridor there. Wouldn't be surprised to see that extended northward a little bit this afternoon. But that's kind of the progression of the 500 millibar pattern. Let's go down to 850 millibars here. You can see that low-level jet does kind of remain in place. It's fairly weak, 20 to 25 knots. That is kind of on the margins again for supercells, for low-level shear for tornadoes. Does increase some after dark. This is at 3Z, so 10 p.m. Central Daylight Time. A little bit of enhancement here across the Texas Panhandle. That is because the surface low begins to take shape. You can see here this is at 0Z here, or 12Z this morning. We move on throughout the day. That surface low does kind of consolidate here across eastern New Mexico. We do see kind of that circulation develop. The surface winds may strengthen a little bit here near that dry line across eastern New Mexico, West Texas. So that may increase the low-level shear a little bit as we go on throughout the day. I'm not sure it's going to be enough to, number one, really pump that better moisture in to this region, and number two, produce an enhanced tornado threat with these storms. So we'll take a look at moisture. Once again, I'm going to zoom in here on the Southern Plains sector. So you can see those 70s and upper 60s dew points confined to far south Texas. We try to get those up to the north. The NAM here showing a kind of patchwork 60-degree dew points out here across eastern New Mexico. Again, mixing may need to be taken into account today given the kind of weak cap on the air mass as we saw in some of these soundings, very weakly capped at this point. So mixing may be a little bit of a concern. Those dew points may come down a little bit. We may see more widespread upper 50s, mid to upper 50s here across eastern New Mexico into far west Texas. That is enough kind of here in the higher terrain areas to get robust storms. So moisture is not a deal breaker today. You can see the moisture does not quite make it up to that northern part of the Texas panhandle as kind of the SPC was highlighting. So storms may struggle a little bit once they move here off the higher terrain of northeast and eastern New Mexico here into the kind of northern half of the Texas panhandle. More robust storm development may be confined to basically kind of according to the NAM here, kind of that Plainview area southward where the best moisture and instability will reside. So let's take some forecast soundings here. We'll go at 21Z, and you can see this moisture just is not that great here. This is at 4 p.m. Still struggling to get even 50s dew points here in eastern New Mexico. So the moisture going to be kind of meager here, just-in-time moisture. We'll take some soundings here, though, just to give you kind of an idea of what may be happening today. We'll do one in that kind of central Texas target here. We'll take one at Austin, San Antonio. So this one up here into eastern New Mexico, you can see a very well-mixed air mass, 80 degrees over 50-degree dew point there. So very high temperature dew point spread, quick outflow dominant nature to these storms most likely. Decent instability here, 1,800 joules per kilogram of CAPE. You can see the photographs, very, very small photographs, very limited low-level curvature here. Right kind of on the margins for supercells, the deep layer shear is at 39 knots, the effective bulk shear. So that is in the range for supercells, but they may be transient given the kind of tendency for these storms to congeal, given their outflow dominant and mostly multi-cell in nature. We'll go farther south into the Texas Panhandle. This is a little bit better, so if we can get better moisture here, this is kind of near the Midland, Odessa area. You can see that the temperature dew point spreads are a little bit better there. Still kind of on the margins, 81 over 61, 20-degree dew point spreads are right on the edge of what is usually accepted as kind of the upper limit for seeing tornadic storms. But 81 over 61 is pretty decent. Large instability here, 3,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE. Once again, photographs are pretty small here. Not a whole lot of deep layer shear. Again, you can see, given that kind of weaker sort of upper level flow here, the bulk shear is a little bit weaker than what we saw up north, 33 knots. Still definitely in the range for supercells. Like to see at least kind of 30 knots of effective bulk shear for supercells. So definitely marginal for supercells. Curvature is a little bit better down here, but I don't know. I'm not sure it's quite enough to see tornadoes. We are seeing maybe 160, or effective storm relative helicity. So there may be just enough low-level shear to maybe eke out a surprise tornado. I think it's going to more depend on boundary interactions, storm mergers, as far as the tornado threat goes today. But again, I think large hail going to be the main threat with discrete updrafts and damaging wind as storms kind of coalesce into a line. This is far west Texas here, much of the same. Better moisture does reside down here. Steep lapse rates aloft, large hail threat. Curvature, not that great down here. Photographs a little bit wonky down here out to the west. And then this is going to be our central Texas target ahead of that first perturbation. Again, photographs very, very wonky, not really favorable for tornadic supercells out here. So let's finally take a look at some model data here. So this is the HRRR. This is some convective allowing model data. This is the 12Z HRRR. So we'll go through, kind of give you an estimate of what the radar might look like later on. So this is going to be at, you can see here, it does not have a great handle on the storms ongoing across Oklahoma right now. This would be at 14Z. I'm doing this video right now, almost 9 a.m. You can see the HRRR has basically nothing up here in Oklahoma, whereas what we're seeing now across Oklahoma is much, much different. Big area of rain and storms here across Oklahoma. So the HRRR not doing a great job handling the ongoing convection. Little bit of a signal out here across West Texas. But again, so you got to take this with a grain of salt. So you can see early afternoon, 1 to 2 p.m. This is at 19Z, 2 p.m. We see that first perturbation start to fire storms out here across kind of, west central Texas, kind of along the I-10 corridor toward the Brownwood area, approaching the Brownwood area near kind of the Abilene area. That's going to be our first round of storms, I think, today, as well as the higher terrain here, maybe across far west and southwest Texas into Mexico a little bit there. Storms should get much more numerous with time. You can see this is at 5 p.m. We do have some storms firing back in eastern New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle on the Cap Rock there. And you can see things just get messy real quickly. Again, bulk shear is kind of on the margins for supercells today. So mostly I think a multi-cell mode, maybe a transient supercell here or there. But storms should tend to be maybe a little bit more outflow dominant given slightly higher temperature dew point spreads. So things should congeal into more of a cluster to linear mode today with time. So you can see just a big mess here. Kind of a second round for places like south central Texas. Moves along to the I-35 corridor well after dark toward midnight here. I-35 corridor down toward Austin, San Antonio, Round Rock, Georgetown, down to the south of those areas here, at least on this model. And then those storms kind of move into the eastern Texas Panhandle by that time as well. So again, I think mostly going to be a damaging wind and perhaps a large hail threat today. The tornado threat is very, very conditional. Mostly going to have to rely on storm mergers and terrain features there, but mostly going to be a damaging wind and large hail threat given the steep lapse rates aloft and more of an outflow dominant storm mode. So yeah, that's what we've got. Again, slight risk out right now for places from Amarillo down toward the south, places like Happy, Tulia, Plainview, Lubbock, Midland, Odessa, down toward the I-10 corridor, Fort Stockton, Junction, Sonora, Iran, down toward Del Rio, Uvalde, Laredo, and then far out to the east for later on this afternoon and evening, particularly that second round into the evening for the I-35 corridor, Round Rock, Georgetown, Austin, San Antonio, Fredericksburg, places like that are in the slight risk. So that's all we have for now. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.